Good morning, everyone. This is Friday, January the 16th, 2015, and this is WX Live webinar number 136, Uncle Pete's Corner, Avoiding Image Cache Issues. It's all yours, Uncle Pete.
Morning. Well, as Tim said, what we're talking about today are image cache issues, and there's a lot of different ways that you can deal with images and so forth. This is the way I'm dealing with it for PC Reminder. As always, there seems to be an infinite number of ways to handle things in WX, but we're going to look at how I'm uploading images and some of the challenges related to browser caches for PC Reminder. So what we're looking at on the screen is the PC Reminder account profile setting, and our higher level subscription levels, which means the folks that pay me more money, get to co-brand their reminders with their own logo. So on their account settings, they can change their logo. So we get a simple upload control, and this is using the standard WX upload control to allow them to upload their logo. And that's the code we're going to look at today. So if we switch over to WB, we will see here's the upload control. Cancel that test.
And Pete, could you make your fonts as big as possible, please?
I'm not really sure how to change the, this is the actual page design. So.
Oh, okay.
So what we're looking at here is this is the upload control, which again is the standard upload control. If you come over to buttons, you get two different ones, either one for sending a single file or sending multiple files. Since this is for them to simply upload their logo, it's always going to be a single file, so I'm using the single file version. Now, one caveat of the upload control to understand is it's actually a flash control, which means this is not going to work properly for any iOS users. So anyone on an iPhone or an iPad is not going to be able to upload an image because they don't have flash, because, well, we don't want to get into why. But regardless, there's been a lot of discussion on the group over the last few months about other solutions, and there are other upload solutions that you can use. For me, at this point, I just decided to heck with the iPhone and iPad users. I'm using the standard control. So if we look at the code behind it, let me close this and reopen it so we see just that code. How's that, Tim?
That's better, yes. Thank you.
All right, so we see that there is a little bit of browser code here, and when you first populate the upload control, it gives you some stubs of some default code, and I've modified that code to do exactly what I need, but you'll see when you first populate an upload control, it does give you a little bit of code to start with. And the first bit of browser code is whenever the list of files to upload changes. In other words, you clicked on the button and selected a file and said, upload this file. It also includes a static that folks can drag and drop onto that static, very similar to the way Gmail works, where you can drag and drop into the email and upload files that way. For this particular interface, I wanted a clean interface. PC Reminder users, the demographic is not technologically savvy users, so the cleaner the interface and the fewer features I give them, the better I am as far as support goes. So anyway, if we look at this code, all it's doing is if there's a file to upload, it resets the progress bar, and then it displays, using cell display dialog, a cell, and that cell is actually a cell that contains the progress bar. And again, all that was populated when I very first populate an upload control. It gives me the button, the static, and this cell with the progress bar in it. So all that came as part of populating that control. So it's displaying that progress bar, and then it's using one of the standard WX functions to actually start the upload. So that's what's actually telling the browser, upload this file. All right, so the next little bit of browser code, and when you populate yours and you look at the default code, you'll notice that these two lines of code I have not tweaked at all. All it's doing is looking at the size of the upload file and updating the progress bar as it goes along. So that's just standard code. That's what's making the progress bar move as the upload progresses. And then we'll skip the server code for just a second. We'll jump down here to the bottom and look at the last bit of code for the browser. Is once the file has completely uploaded, it closes the cell dialog, which gets rid of the progress bar, is what that's doing. And you, instead of using the cell and doing the cell display, you could just have the progress bar and do a hide and a display. The reason that they're doing it inside a cell is you could actually have that progress bar over the top of your image control or something, so that it only just, it's not using up a piece of your interface while you're not uploading. So that's the reason they use the cell and do cell display dialog, is so that it can be displayed over the top of another piece of your interface. All right, so now the real workhorse of the upload routine is this bit of server code here. And notice that this code is Ajax enabled, because we don't want the edit screen to completely refresh once this is done. First few lines is just defining some fields we're going to use later. Starting at line 5, we get into the actual code, and the first thing we use is the WX function ftemp file, which gives us a temporary file name. It generates a random temporary file, and that file name includes the Windows temporary directory. Right now we're using the Windows temporary directory to handle all this, because right now we're just dealing with uploading the file. We're not putting it out where it's accessible from the web just yet. The next thing I do is I need just the file name. I don't need the temporary file directory, because our next command requires just the file name by itself. So I'm using a little trick of the extract string function to accomplish that without having to do a bunch of complex string parsing logic. All I'm doing is saying extract from that string, which extract string is a function that lets you pull pieces of a string that are delimited. So if you've got a comma delimited string, you could do extract string and get the third element out of that comma delimited list. Well, what I'm doing is saying, okay, the backslash is my delimiter, and I want to start from the end instead of from the beginning, and I want the first element. Well, what that means is I'm going to see everything past the last slash, which in a file name, that would be the actual file name minus all the directory stuff. So that's just a little trick I'm using to strip the directory off of the file name. Then at line 7, we copy the uploaded file, which at this point I assume it's in memory. I'm not 100% sure exactly where it lives at this point, but to get it into a physical file that I can manipulate, I need to do the upload copy file. And this is the whole reason I had to strip off the directory, is because it takes 2 parameters: the path where I want it stored and the name of the file. So at this point, we now have the file they uploaded setting on the drive in that temporary directory. At line 8, just to prove their programmer's work is never done, now I need the file name with the temporary path back on it, so I stitch it back together. And then the next line, I'm just finding out, once again, this is a standard WX function to find out the size of the file. I use the size of the file because one of the requirements you will see as we get a little further into the code is I only allow them to use a certain size image file. Then line 10 is another very nice WX function, bitmap info. Bitmap info returns a tab delimited string with different attributes of an image file. And then the next 3 lines, I'm using the extract string function again to find out the first, the second, and the third element of that delimited string, which is the format of the image, the width, and the height of the image.
Oh, Pete?
Yes, sir.
Wolfgang just put a comment here saying you can use f extract path open and close paren for getting the file name.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't bumped into that function. Yet again, proving that there are many, many ways to do just about everything with WX code. It's amazing how flexible the code is.
Yeah, thank you, Wolfgang.
All right, so now I know the format of the file, meaning I know if it's a PNG file, an image, a JPEG file, a GIF file. This also would let me know that it's not an image file at all, because it would come back as something other than one of the expected formats. And I also know the width and height of the file, or of the actual image, and that's pixel width and height. I then have a few else-if statements where I'm restricting them to a 64K file that's 140 by 70, and that it's a PNG file. The reason I have such heavy restrictions on the logo that you're using is because it's going to be incorporated into email reminders later, so it has to be a certain size and to fit the format, and you don't want a super large file that's going to go out in every email. So that's the reason that it's so restrictive. But this is some version of this code is a very good way for you to make sure that someone isn't uploading something that you don't want them to upload. So if it passes all those tests, we get to line 23. Line 23 we'll discuss shortly. Line 24 is now we have uploaded a file. That file has passed our test. It's the right size, the right format. So now we can, the user has uploaded an acceptable file. So now I'm moving that file using the fcopy file from the temporary directory over to a directory that's under my web folder, so that it will be accessible via the internet, via the web. So if we looked at what Glow primary directory is, we can actually come over to the project code and see that Glow primary directory, that is where my website is actually published to. So that's the physical directory where my website is published. So all I'm doing is making a copy of that file, using the user ID as part of that name, and placing that file over in a directory that's web accessible. And then line 25 is taking my image control, which is just a image control on the screen that has been set to dynamic, 100% display. You'll notice it's 140 by 70, the maximum size I'm allowing, and it's not linked to anything. And both that dynamic and that linking setting are very important, and that's where, when you start playing with image files and image controls, there's a lot of different ways to do it. If I was linking to a database image, all of this code would be slightly different, because how that is done is slightly different. Because remember, once again, at the end of the day, every bit of code that gets put out of WebDev has to make it into HTML and JavaScript code. Well, that means that that image has to be an image accessible from HTML code. So if you're loading an image from the database, WebDev is having to do some stuff to accomplish that. Since I'm actually telling it an actual physical file, I'm doing more of a standard HTML type code. And just in a second, we'll actually look at the screen and examine the HTML code, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So this line of code has changed that image file, that image control, to be our new file that we just uploaded, so that we see the new image. And the final bit of code is just deleting that temporary image from the temporary directory, just to clean it up behind ourselves. So let's actually take a look at this and run it. And if we go to info, we go into the account settings for this account, we see the screen that we were on. Now I can, if I inspect this image, which that's that image control we were talking about, you will notice, and I don't, yeah, okay, well, let me pull that up. You'll notice that the source name is that name that we built, which is the web directory, and then under that, co-brand, and then the user ID.png. And that's where this image is being displayed from. We can actually copy this link and see that that is a web accessible image. You know, since I'm running locally, we're using localhost, but it would be the exact same thing. You know, if you were actually running on the remote server, it'd be www.pcreminder.com. All right, so now if we click Upload Image and change our logo, okay, notice the logo did not change on the screen. And you may be thinking at this point, something's wrong with my code. And this is the heart of the matter of what we're discussing today. Browsers, to improve speed, want to cache images. So when Chrome first loaded up this page, it saw and cached 43.png. Well, I have now uploaded a new 43.png, but Chrome doesn't know that, so it's still showing me its cached image, because when it tries to redisplay this page, it wants to do it as quickly as possible, So it's using 43.png out of its temporary cache instead of pulling a new one down from the website. And I can prove that by, if we actually go look, this is that directory. We see now that 43.png is that image of a flower, even though what we're seeing on the screen is this Next Age logo still. The problem is the cache. How do we get around the cache issue of the browser? Well, I have played with several different solutions over the years, and again, it depends on what type of images you're doing, what solution is going to work best for you. Since I'm actually using physical images and I have a standard URL path, the method that I'm about to show you works very well. In other instances, I've actually used different file names. So I actually copy it to file name 1, file name 2, just so that the cache thinks that it's a different image. But that was a very code-intensive method of doing it. So I didn't like doing it that method, and once I found this new method, it's much cleaner. We can actually come over and if we load this image, if we were, we see that it is indeed pulling a new image, but that's because I did a refresh. I forced that cache. Sometimes you have to do, in Chrome, it's a Control F5 to force a new cache. But regardless, somehow I have to get that cache to refresh. We can't really do a Control F5 on this page because it's a WebDev dynamic page, and it really doesn't like it when we try to refresh. So if we come back over to the code, my solution is very simple. All we do is change line 25. And let me just make sure, yeah, let me clean it. I had changed the line up here as well so that we could see something. Okay, so line 25, all I've done is added to the back end of it $V equals and tacked a random number onto the end of it, which that was the whole reason for line 23, was to get a random number between 1 and 100. Those of you that are familiar with URLs in HTML code will recognize that this is a URL parameter. Image files, their source is a HTML URL. And since URL parameters can be added onto a URL, you can pass parameters to it. And you'll notice if you examine enough websites, sometimes that the source of a image is actually a JavaScript command with a bunch of parameters and so forth on it. So, you know, it can be more than just a static URL path. In this instance, because our first part of that is a physical file, we get the file displayed, but because we've tacked that URL onto the end of it, we've now tricked the browser cache, because it looks at the entire source name and sees $V equals 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever random number it generated. And the next time it sees it with a different random number, now magically the browser cache thinks it's a different image because it's looking at the entire source name, so it thinks the entire image is different. And if we run this code now, we can actually see that. Now if we inspect this element, we will see where it's tacked on $V equals 1. It's tacked on a random number onto the back end of that image. And now if we upload a file and choose the flower logo, notice it changed. And the reason it changed is now if we are inspecting that element, we see that it changed to v equals 65, a different random number. And once again, the browser cache is looking at this entire string to determine whether or not it can cache that image. And since the entire string has changed, it can't cache that image because it thinks it's a different image. So that is how I beat the browser cache issue in this instance. Last little bit of code I'll show you is just for the initial loading of the image when we are editing an existing record. We have this little bit of code here. Once again, I need a random number. Then only the level of users above 2 can co-brand their logos. I look to see if that file exists. If it does exist, I set that image to that file. This is the exact same line of code as what we would see down below that we just edited. You know, and again, we're sticking that v equals random number onto the end of it. If the file doesn't exist, some of our users don't want to use their own logo. So if they haven't provided a logo file, we show the standard PC Reminder logo. And then finally, if their level is not above a 2, they don't have any choice, we show the standard PC Reminder logo. And because I'm dealing with a physical file that I'm storing on the drive, the save code doesn't have anything to do with any of this. We're just storing that physical file, so there is nothing in the save code related to the image whatsoever. So that is it. That is, you know, a little primer into uploading files. Like I said, there's many different ways to handle uploads and to handle images, and I probably have done them all at different times. Sometimes it makes sense to store them in the database. Sometimes it makes sense to store them as physical files. In this instance, these images are getting attached to emails constantly. Therefore, I need the physical files anyway, so I'm storing the physical files. Any questions?
I don't see any, Pete. That's good stuff, Pete.
Yeah, there you go. I've confused them enough to make sure we don't have any questions.
Yeah, but now they can go back and they can watch it and rewatch it as much as they want on YouTube. Thanks again. Anybody else have anything? Andy? Andy's mic's muted.
Fabrice had mentioned on Skype that there is a 19 patch that referred to refreshing images in Ajax. I suspect that is related to images that are coming out of a database or something. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that patch. I have seen some wackiness from time to time with images not refreshing when I would expect them to. The issue that I'm showing you today really doesn't have anything to do with WebDev. It's strictly a browser issue of caching physical images. So the issue I'm showing you today, you would have this same issue if you were developing in PHP or First Page or whatever. You would still have this caching of images issue. So it's really not related technically to WebDev. It's just this is how I beat it with WebDev.
Okay. Do we hear anything else? Let me look at the Q&A panel again. There are no questions. So, well, once again, thank you very much, Pete, and thank you all for who attended. This video is on YouTube, and I'll send a link to the community page here in a few moments. So if there'll be nothing else, I'll try to do my best Andy impression. Be good or be good at it. You have a good weekend. Bye.